Good day and God bless everyone, especially to you, ma'am. God bless you. So I am Ashi Poven. I am secondary college student taking up the program of Bachelor of Science in Accountancy. So now I am going to discuss about the natural law of Saint Thomas Aquinas. So first, who is Saint Thomas Aquinas? So Saint Thomas Aquinas, he is an Italian Catholic priest who belongs to the religious order or preachers or Dominicans, and then he was born in 1225, and the title Aquinas identifies his place of origin, and that is Aquino, which belonged originally to the kingdom of Naples and about 120 kilometers south of Rome. So he was born to an affluent and influential family, and his father was recognized as the Count of Aquino. Saint Thomas Aquinas died on March 7, 1274, leaving behind him notable works like Summa Contra Gentiles, the Summa Theology, and the Veritarit. So the Catholic Church honors him as a doctor, and a lot of given to saints who are recognized as givers of particularly important insights in the understanding of Christian doctrine or the Christian's faith. So in our present age, it is not impervious to such attacks of absurdity, frustration, and also the near desperation. But history, however, it is gracefully replete with people who have exerted effort in pointing out a viable way out of such darkness and confusion. So one of the options, if one wants to call it that, was arrived at through the meeting between philosophy and the religion of revelation, that is Christianity. So now we're going to talk about the natural law of St. Thomas Aquinas. And with that, the best representative of this integration, and arguably also an excellent thinking through a reasonable way that addresses the questions of the human person, is the philosophy of the St. Thomas Aquinas. So now we are going to talk about the Thomas systemic approach, and that is meant to guide human action, is known as an ethics of natural law. So while his metaphysics harks back to medieval times of belief in God, so his ethical system it endures us until contemporary times in the moral guidelines followed and lived out by religious believers who belong to the Catholic tradition. Alright, so now let's proceed to the ipsi Deus non daretur. So what does it mean? So in English, it means that as if there were no God. So the phrase ipsi Deus non daretur, or as if there were no God, so it is becoming a way of our life which has its roots, and of course in a kind of arrogance of reason. So also the reason was actually created and loved by God, and but it is now held to be sufficient unto itself, and uh, closes itself from contemplating and seeking a truth that lies beyond it. Because from the phrase as if there were no God, so that is how uh, we can say that it has its roots, the kind of arrogance of reason in our life. And also we can say that we are closes itself off from contemplating, and we are seeking the truth of the lies beyond it, right? So now let's talk about how Thomas Aquinas standpoint the faith, or his faith. Okay, so Thomas Aquinas begins from the standpoint of faith, and his perspective presupposes the existence of a God who is the author, or let us say the source, and then the goal also, which is the end of all reality. And then this creator for Thomas, however, relates in freedom with the human person, and so enables him or her in freedom to recognize through reason. So the very principle of foundations of all things. So that is what Thomas Aquinas stated. That is true reason. Okay, so now in accordance with this foundational knowledge of Saint Thomas Aquinas, so the human person can choose to act in such a way that it is worthy of one's very reality. And then uh, one who can reach the wisdom at the very heart of all things is obliged to act in accordance with his or her dignity. And then the human being then is said to be gifted with the ability to know the highest good, and that engages him or her in freedom and in choosing to act on the good that he or she ought to do. Okay? So, ayan. So, we are now also to touch with the freedom. So, the freedom here is knowing the best goal and being able to reach for it through decisive action. Um, so, that is the freedom also, that we have to know the best goal and being able to reach through our actions. So, we have to do our best. We have the freedom to do in everything what we want, but hopefully in a right way and in a good way. And then this is expressed interiorly, that it is in the very heart of every human person as the dictate of doing good and avoiding evil. So of course, no, uh, even though we have a freedom, of course we have to do it heartedly from the bottom of our heart. We have to do it heartedly, and not just we are forced. We are forced to do it, right? So every human person as the dictate of doing good and avoiding evil. So for me, I have to prefer for good and I have to avoid the evil. So that's what we are usually do naman. So that is for Aquinas, the his statement of ipsi Dios non-deritor, or as if there were no God. So for Aquinas, God reveals his goodwill as the eternal law reflected in the order of reality. So relating with the law as governing all is relating with God himself, whose will emanates to govern all that is. And then, the reality then of life as growth, nutrition, and reproduction is now founded on the will that is eternal. And then, even the reality of sensitive consciousness as ruled by instinct, that is true of animals and is also in accordance with the same will. So, that plants persist to carry themselves out to the fullness of being plants. So, it is an imprint of the governing will that comes to human understanding as law. Okay, so let us say that animals governed by instincts behave in such and such a way. So that is also recognized by the human person as following the dictate of a law, and that guides all of creation. Alright, so now the reality of a human, the reality of the human person who is able through his or her intellect to decide in freedom, and of course through his or her will to move himself or herself voluntarily in accordance with the good that he or she can know, follows the very will of God who has created man in his own image. And that is according to Genesis 1 verse 27. So man in his fullness shares life with plants and animals, but goes beyond them in his voluntary action and freedom in decisions. Okay, so let's proceed to the human freedom for St. Thomas. So therefore, it is an imprint of the divine will in the very being of the human person. So this sharing of human reason in the eternal will or divine law is for him or her the natural law. So this is the concept of natural law of St. Thomas Aquinas. So the relationship between the eternal and the natural law for him or her is expressed in the sacred book for Christians. Thus, since the creation of the world, God's invisible will, his power, and the nature. So it has been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made visible, so that people are without excuse. And that is according to Romans chapter 1 verse 20. So the divine will now is that according to this code can be understood as governing all that is. Man's task is to act in such a way that his or her participation in the full unfolding of nature directs it to the fulfillment. Alright, so next is what is this law? This natural law. So this law impinges on the very freedom of the human being who can know his or her options and voluntarily will to take the action. So the rational human person's participation, ability to discern what is good from what is not, is the very presence of the dictate of the law within him or her. So it is also the imprint on him or her of the Creator, which is the divine will. So the human person then, who is able to draw up specific laws that govern himself or herself, his or her society, and his or her relationship with all creation, is now also the author of positive laws. So the natural law necessarily takes precedence over positive laws, and not all that is legal in human society reflects the law that dictates on the human person as ethical. So that is in accordance with natural law. What is legal then is not always necessarily moral. Okay, so this ethics of natural law has gained wide acceptance at one point in the history of Western civilization that it has come to be espoused even if one presents from the faith system that has engendered it. So that is, the Ixidios Nandaretur is an expression that highlights the validity of this ethical system of St. Thomas Aquinas rather. So with or without faith in the Creator of God, so this Ixidios Nandaretur, it is an expression that highlights the validity of this system. So literally, Ixidios Nandaretur, it is an even if there is no God in English, so this implies that the wisdom of the ethical system that is natural law is valid and it bind for the human person even if we bracket belief in God. Now, let's proceed with the conscience and the natural law. So, the ability of man to know, it is important in his or her acting ethically. Hence, if one follows St. Thomas' discussion on conscience, one is inclined to conclude that it is the proper functioning of reason in moving the human person towards an end goal that is fitting of his or her dignity. So, one cannot do the right thing if one does not know what it is, right? And then the famous dictate then to follow the conscience absolutely is tied to an obligation to educate it. And then not knowing St. Thomas Aquinas is not an excuse. So even if one does not know, he or she is obliged to know. And then if one acts badly out of ignorance and does not act to rectify the situation by bothering to learn, so that person is to be held accountable according to the angelic doctor. Alright, so while the conscience absolutely binds us in doing the good and avoiding evil, so the conscience as reason is also absolutely tasked to be given formation, right? So the conscience therefore can be mistaken and being so does not exempt the human person from culpability, right? So if he or she is able to know but fails to act in his or her obligation to do so, then he or she is not free from the blame and responsibility for what was done. Of course, right? So, because of our conscience. And then, now let's proceed to the different kinds of conscience that may lead us to wrongdoing. So, what are they? There are 4 different kinds of conscience. So, first we have the callous, the perplexed, the scrupulous, and the ignorant. So, now, the uninformed conscience simply lacks of education, while the perplexed one needs guidance in sorting out one's confusion. So the callous and the scrupulous are binary opposites, but both are malformed. So it is in being too lax or too strict. And then, about callousness, when we say callousness of the conscience, it results in the long-time persistence in doing evil that the self is no longer concerned whether what he or she does is good or bad. And then the scrupulousness, on the other hand, it fails to trust one's ability to do good, and hence it overly concerns itself with avoiding what is bad to the point of seeing wrong where there really is none, right? So if one thinks about it, these different consciences that lead to badness in action can readily be rectified by our education. So now, let's move on to the 3 contemporary questions. So, in the Thomistic natural law, so there are relevant questions that can help us to appreciate this natural law or this Thomistic natural law of St. Thomas Aquinas. So if we follow what has been earlier said, that natural law is man's participation in the execution of the good and the avoidance of evil, so through the use of his or her reason and will, so then there are three questions that originated from the writing of, that is according to Alasdair MacIntyre, can be appropriated to highlight the relevance of Aquinas today. Okay, so what are these three contemporary questions? So first we have the who am I, then the who do I want to be, and the last one is how can I get there. So first let's have the who am I. Okay, so who am I? Thomistic natural law interrogates the identity of the human person. So if one is endowed with his or her own facticity, history, and abilities, his or her present reality is accessible to him or her through her or his self-knowledge and reflection. And then, this assessment of one's own strengths and weaknesses is critical in being able to do good and avoid evil. So, this ethical task is not only an outward truth, but doing good determines the actor in a reality that is good, and doing bad, it malforms. It malforms us too, right? It really is. In doing good, it can malform us. And then the reality of human identity is that it is something defined yet also always in process. Yes, our real identity is something defined because it is in the process of our everyday doing, right? In our everyday activity. So, the task of knowing the self, it is the point of our departure for the task of building up the identity of the human person. So, ethics here does not only cover the issues that usually call our attention, such as abortion, the euthanasia, or other burning moral questions of this sort. So, ethics for Aquinas is primarily a question of human identity. So, all human acts are moral acts, and that is according to Aquinas. Since it is through his or her acts that man defines himself or herself, the ethical man is the task of his here or here free acts, right? Okay, so now let's move on to who do I want to be? Also, this is the second contemporary question. So, here, we can say that this is referring to the one person. Who do I want to be? So, defining the self gives one a chance to clarify his or her goal. So, the human person's self-knowledge is dynamic, and that is, it is always open to the direction set by what one wants to make of himself or herself. Right? How we are going to make ourselves, how we are going to make our decisions, our own decisions in doing such things, right? And so, self-knowledge here is malleable towards self-determination. So, our self-knowledge, it is malleable towards our self-determination. So the ethical acts, it gives our direction through freedom to build up the self towards our particular goal. And then, the human reason is so gifted that it is able to discern through options and daily realities. And then, the decisions that are the basis of one's freedom in choosing what wants to be. Of course, when we are going to decide, when we're going to make the decisions, so those decisions, those are our basis. Those are our basis of our own freedom. Because we're going to choose what we are going to be, right? So the self also considers the truthful transition to what one ought to be. So given this knowledge of himself or herself and the ability to evaluate his or her options and possibilities, so the self or ourself can also better give direction to ourself. Right? Okay, so now let's move on to the third contemporary question, which is how can I get there? So, in truth, it also fully utilizes the sound judgment of human reason, and it evaluates the best route to get to the goal decided upon. So the last question, it breaks down the task to be done into the particulars of our actions, and that is in our daily routine. And then, here, the self-knowledge and the self-determination are bridged by self-governance. So the human person does not only access reason to assess his or her personal identity and the personal goal, but he or she is also gifted with the will to command the self to go through the steps and hence be able to do the transition from knowledge to a fully determined self. Right. So the goal setting through reason and decision is complemented by the ability to freely move the self and command the body in action. All right. Now, when we are going to set a goal, when we are going to achieve it, how we're going to complement by our ability, so we can freely move ourselves, and it lead us to have or to do an action. So it is in orchestrating the actions to be consistent, so with the end in mind that the self reaches improvement. So now let's move on to the relational and perfection of love in Aquinas. So although we have suspended God talk to make the case that natural law is relevant even for the human person without faith, so the discussion of Thomistic ethics, it is incomplete if it does not end with a love that is directed toward God. Alright, so toward God rather. Okay, so now the Thomistic natural law, it is not Christian, but it's simply because it is an ethics reconcilable or compatible with faith. So it is a disciplined system that finds ultimate foundation and perfection in the reality of God. So while through its Dios non-derator, we are afforded the autonomy of a reasonable ethics independent from faith. So ultimately, this ethics is given full meaning and perfection in a relationship with God. So this is what we can say that only God's love is real, right? If you believe that one. For me, I am devoted Christian, so I do believe that God is love, and the love is always for God, and we tend to do good things because we tend to do good things to others because of our love to God, because we are as a children of God, so we tend to do good things heartedly, and that is because of our love to our God. Alright, so now through all the process, through all the contents that we discussed, now the conclusion is Thomas Aquinas, he was influential in his articulation of the theory of natural law. So he showed us that the universe was determined by an order of love, and that ought to define the sense of the good of human beings. So whether one believes in a transcendent, loving God or not, he showed how people could intuit and order things that was inherent to all beings that existed. So whether one was a believer or not, so one could see that there is this order which is the ground of people's wholeness and self-realization. So many philosophers up to this day build upon this idea of a natural order upon which is founded a natural law. So even in legal theories, this foundational idea is influential. It is influential. Even though there are theories that evolve, still it insists that the foundation of our norms in doing good, it should be rooted in human reason alone. So in the school of thought, according to Immanuel Kant, would be one of the most important thinkers. So again, we are going to base on our reasons. So that's why we can say in such situations that everything happens for a reason, because everything that we do, all the activities that we do every day, we tend to do are beyond with reasons. We all have the reasons why we do the things, why we have to do the things, why we want the things, why we have to achieve that goal. So everything happens for a reason, and everything has a reason. So I think that would be all about the natural law of St. Thomas Aquinas. So thank you so much, and God bless.